I was desperate for a pee, but I'd wasted so much time ripping the door apart that I had to pee from the steps outside. I said nothing. A small feller was standing at the bar having a drink when something hit him on the back of his neck. He woke up on the floor with the barman standing over him, who said, "The big guy told me to tell you that was a karate chop." The next day, the same thing occurred, but the roles were reversed. And the big bully woke up on the floor to hear the barman saying, "The little feller told me to tell you that that was the starting handle off a 1997 Ford Pop." One day, when I was strolling around the shopping area of Nairobi, I was lucky enough to meet our Aden base commanding officer. He was on a business trip, another fiddle. He inquired as to my cash situation and actually lent me some money until I returned to Aden. Isn't it nice to have connections? Did I return his loan? The last 3 or 4 weeks in Aden were spent getting ready for my pending return to civilization after 3 years of being bemused by the curious antics respectfully seen in the Middle East and Africa. This excitement was quelled somewhat when I went to the camp open-air cinema to see Chubby Checker teaching the Western world how to twist. Have you noticed the similarity between tribal dances and this new dance? The twist, which I had just seen for the first time. I boarded the plane for the UK, not knowing quite what to expect after a 3-year absence. I left just in time because on my last day, some local twit put a bullet through the colonel's plane window. It missed him by inches, but it was a message to me that I really should be on my way ASAP. When I arrived back in England, my ma'am hugged me and sobbed, "Where have you been? We've missed you so much." It was heartwarming to see all my folks again, and we talked forever to bring each other up to date. Parties and pub crawls took up most of my 4 weeks' leave. The remainder of the time was spent inviting people to drag up a sandbag and listen to my stories. "Hey, everybody does it," I reported to Middle Wallop for the radio course, which you'd probably forgotten about. The course was very intensive, and we had a civilian tutor. To digress for a moment, he told us that our military qualification was equivalent to a civilian degree, and we would have no trouble securing a job when we left the forces. I wish he'd put that in writing. I could sue the twit. It doesn't matter how you cut it. The ex-soldier is perceived as a thick sod that's been trained to kill. However, I did eventually put my knowledge to good use. The course included a review of our knowledge of aircraft instruments. During an oral exam, a stroppy sergeant, an expert who had never left the training facility, described a multifaceted fault and asked me to diagnose the cause. I told him it was so complex that it could only be sabotage. He hit the roof, called me a sarcastic son of a bitch, and reported me to the CO. When my extensive experience in this field came to light, the CO was quite amused and agreed with my diagnosis. He did, however, comment on my sarcasm, but moved the stroppy one to a new position. Did you know that an expert is an ordinary person with a briefcase who is more than 50 miles from home? I was now in the last few months of my 6-year Army career and summoned before a panel of salesmen posing as officers. They tried to convince me to sign on for another 16 years to complete 22 years. Could they be serious? They explained that a lot of money had been spent on my technical training and actually offered me a university education and a commission. I still can't believe it, but it is true. If I declined, I would have to leave the course and go earn my keep for the remaining few months. Under my breath, I said I'd never survive another 16 years. Out loud, I told them that I'd promised my mother, which sounded better than mom, that I would definitely leave the Army after 6 years, and I never break a promise. But let me finish the course, leave the Army, and after a few months with my family, I would definitely return to comply with their wishes. The suckers believed me, and I remained on the course for the remaining few months with a constant grin on my face. That's one promise that I never did keep. 1 week after graduating, I was in the D-Mob camp in Arborfield, waiting for my release. I passed most of the time walking around with a clipboard and pencil, doing nothing, only trying to look intelligent. Nobody questioned me. With very little interest, I looked at the camp notice board one morning. It indicated that I had to report to the medical office for vaccinations. I made the necessary inquiries and was told sarcastically that this was a transit camp and all personnel had to be ready for posting anywhere in the world. I was scheduled to be given jabs for malaria, swamp fever, and all the other exotic illnesses. The nurse laughed when I went and canceled these after I told her equally sarcastically, "I'm only going to Bolton." After a couple of days of doing sweet FA, a sergeant suggested I do a guard duty the following night. I guess they were understaffed. In view of the short notice, he would arrange for my D-Mob to be brought forward 3 days. My counteroffer of guard duty that night and D-Mob the next day was accepted. After an extremely long night, I jubilantly packed all my belongings and bade my final farewell to the envious bystanders. I couldn't believe it. I had done my time and survived. I arrived at the main gate, just dying to tell someone that I was leaving for the last time. I was in luck. Walking towards me was a scrawny kid, obviously a new guy, as he appeared to be lost. This was my chance. I slowed down to a brisk walk and smiled. He asked, "Can you please tell me where I have to report?" So I told him. Then he asked me how long had I signed on for. 6 years, I replied. How long have you done? Was his anticipated next question. 6 years, I replied, and ran off laughing like hell. In all fairness, I should say that military service can be enjoyable and educational. But to all you guys that signed on for the duration, Civvy Street is better. Civilian life, 1,964 to 1,970. Since I had joined the Army, my dad had been working so very hard to improve our family's standard of living. Bless him. He tried everything, and I guess he succeeded as they had moved from their modest little house that I had left and moved to a bigger one. It was while in this house my dad entered a competition in the now defunct Daily Sketch. There were some super prizes, such as Gordon Surtees' motorbike and many other exciting and pricey goodies. Guess what he won? Diana Dore's bed. But I'm happy to say that my deserving parents enjoyed this luxurious prize for the rest of their lives, after taking out the front upstairs window to get the monstrous thing into the bedroom. This house was nice, but in my opinion, still not the one they so rightly deserved for all the effort they had put into life. I convinced them to look for something else. With all my traveling over the past few years, I had an idea of the kind of houses that would be affordable, so I looked for a small bungalow in the right neighborhood. My parents were somewhat nervous about their son pushing them to buy the kind of house that they had previously only dreamed about. But my offer to help with the financial aspect did ease their minds. I found a 4-year-old semi-detached bungalow in a really nice area, and we went ahead and bought it. When building a house, a brickie ran out of bricks, so the boss said, "Bung a low roof on it." My ma'am was so happy to have all the rooms on one level. She once said, "It was like being on holiday all the time." The one-level concept sent my thoughts to the past. If only we had been in this house when I was younger. I could have got to my room faster. When sent there as punishment by my dad, and not received as many slaps on my backside. Don't get your knickers in a twist. Remember what I said earlier about carrying punishment. The move to our new house went well, and we began the arduous task of finding a place for everything and cleaning. No matter how clean a new house is, when you first move in, you feel the need to clean it again, well, don't you? It started to get dark and we switched on some lights. Holy shit. The skinflint previous owner had taken every bloody light bulb in the place, and by now, all the shops had closed. I introduced myself to our new neighbor with tongue in cheek and borrowed a few bulbs. We continued working until the wee hours and flopped in our beds when we could do no more, but not before we were confronted with a mystery smell in every room. Surely our cleaning was of the highest standard. That sounds posh, doesn't it? We hunted high and low for the dead rat, even the attic and the crawl space under the floor. I eventually concluded that the source of the smell could only be from the light bulb sockets. The smell seemed to occur when they got hot from the bulbs. I tested this hypothesis and replaced all the light fittings. It worked to our relief. Now we know why he had removed all the bulbs, don't we? How could I afford to help Mom and Dad? I haven't told you about the job search yet. When I left the Army, I hunted high and low for some company that needed either a trained killer or a highly qualified aircraft technician. In case you don't know, there are not many hitmen jobs or airports in Bolton. Realizing this, whilst cursing the guy who had said we could get a job anywhere, I did in fact put my electronic training to use and secure a job repairing television with a local company. I couldn't wait for success, so I went on without it. Jonathan Winters. I was working on the Saturday morning following our move on the previous Wednesday. There was a torrential downpour. In layman's terms, it chucked it down. I rushed home, at my mam's request, to find our drive had been washed away into the neighbors. We worked all weekend shoveling the resultant mixture of the nice decorative stone from our neighbor's drive and crappy cinders from ours, provided us both with an acceptable surface. Both driveways were eventually tarmacked by one of those annoying lying twits that come around and give you a cock and bull story about having a load of tarmac left over from another job. And they'll pave your drive for a good price. We fell for it, and fortunately, they did a reasonable job. Back to my employment. It wasn't easy to get. I had to fib a little. Don't get snotty. You've done it. I indicated with my fingers crossed that I could repair televisions. I figured my experience would get me through. It did to a certain extent, but what a struggle. If it hadn't been for Jimmy G, I would have been looking for another job sooner than I did. Unfortunately, Jimmy was soon to be faced with a divorce from his unappreciative wife. In fact, I was a witness at the hearing. I was nearly thrown out of court when her solicitor asked me when I had last seen Jimmy and his wife together. September, I replied, but he kept pumping me for an exact date, quite rudely in my opinion. I got angry and told him that I didn't keep a diary recording the date when I last saw my friends, especially their wives. September would just have to do. This remark almost brought about my eviction from the court. However, I do believe I saw a grin on the judge's face. The divorce was granted, and Jim was now free. Don't laugh. But I later taught him how to waltz, in the basement at work, to help him when his hormones triggered in again. Maybe his wife was right to ask for a divorce. At the local dance, a chap crossed the floor to ask this girl for dance. She refused, and when he asked her why she had smiled at him, she replied, "I was too polite to laugh." Variation of a Tony Hancock joke. When I eventually decided that TV repair was not my vocation, I looked around for another job. My previous employer, de Havilland, in Lostock, took a chance and hired me to work on electronic circuitry. Holy Moses! Had technology ever moved on? Components were smaller than ever. It was a good job. My eyes were still okay. We had our laughs at this place. A foreman was given this cruel nickname Trestle Legs because of his unfortunate deformity. However, this didn't give him the right to peep over the toilet door to spy on his workers. He was fired along with a chap who didn't believe a girl could have such big boobs and tried to prove it by feeling. What is it with these people? He might have got away with it in those days, had she not been the plant superintendent's daughter. It was whilst working in this electronic or sex shop that I made friends with a budding entrepreneur, Keith Granville Barlow. Notice his initials, KGB. Makes you wonder how he got a job in a top-secret establishment. Keith was a time-served auto electrician, and I referred to him as a budding entrepreneur. Put these together, and you have a bloke that is itchy to leave his employ and start his own business. My thinking was much the same, so we talked. I was not qualified in Keith's field, but being proficient in aircraft electrics seemed close enough. As in all business startups, cash was a big consideration, but we discarded this as an excuse, not a reason, and took the plunge. It was mutually agreed to set up an auto electrical business. A priority was to locate affordable premises. We arranged for a concrete garage manufacturer to erect an oversized double garage on their land on Chorley New Road in Horwich. They did this at no initial cost and a reasonable monthly rent. Having begged, borrowed, and stole as many tools and equipment we could find, we worked nights and weekends building up our clientele. After a couple of months or so, a point was reached when we felt the business could support us at a pinch. The supervisor at de Havilland was not surprised when we handed in our notices. Merlin Auto Electrics was open for business full-time, and we were both proud of the fact that we had built up quite a large customer base of commercial vehicle operators. We worked long hours during the next few years and discovered that business life is not as easy as it appears. We struggled with little surplus cash accumulating, and in fact, not much to live on. I'm sure you know somebody that has gone through this very trying experience. In addition to all the usual business problems, commercial vehicle repair work is a hard, dirty, and cutthroat segment of the automotive field. We plodded on, convinced that we were doing the right things, and we certainly worked hard, but we were weakening. I was still living at home with my parents, so my financial requirements were modest. Keith, on the other hand, was married to a supergirl, Fiona, and therefore had different requirements from life. She was very understanding, but they now had a son, Spencer, and required more money than we could generate just to survive. To compound the problem, I must confess that I was not easy to get along with. I believe my attitude was that I thought I'd been around more than Keith, and I tried to impose my ideology on him. In retrospect, he had some good philosophies, but I was too stubborn. Our partnership came to an end. Keith and family went to live in Scotland, and I moved the business to Blackrod. The two employees and I continued working all hours, but managing only to survive. This fine balance continued until mid-1969, when my personal life took a change. For the better. Remember the little gem I mentioned earlier? I will now elaborate. It's a long and complex story, but please bear with me. It's an important part of my life. Rita was a gentle lady with an unbelievable personality, but unfortunately unhappily married, and on the verge of leaving her husband. In fairness to him, It wouldn't be decent of me to go into details, but she was quite justified feeling the way she did. I fell for Rita like a ton of bricks. She responded to my wooing, rather cautiously at first, for obvious reasons, but finally succumbed. I hasten to say that I did not initiate the marriage breakdown. I was more a catalyst in the situation. Leaving with only personal clothes, Rita went to stay with Sadie, a friend of mine. My family reacted to the whole situation with skepticism at first, but soon accepted her for what she was. A wonderful person who had the misfortune to be trapped in a marriage that wasn't to be. Usually a chap who runs off with another chap's wife simply wants to borrow her. Not me. We decided to live in sin. Remember, it's 1,969. And good old Jimmy G came to our rescue. He had a nice little bungalow in Adlington all to himself after his divorce, and he was away on business during the week. He very kindly suggested we move in and asked only for a very nominal rent. We accepted gratefully. On a drive into the countryside one day, we fell in love with a very old stone house on the slopes of Winter Hill, the highest point in the area, and the location of several broadcasting masts. The house wasn't for sale, but inquiries revealed that it soon would be. I reached an agreement with the elderly owner and moved in within a week. The following 11 months were spent renovating and trying to start a family. The renovations went well, but the latter did not, I'm sorry to say. Enough said about that, if you will excuse me. We were very content in our little house. Actually, it was quite big. It was 2 houses combined into one. It wasn't luxurious, but it did have a feature that is coveted these days, a fireplace. Dare I say, there were 4. Anyhow, the whole place was as cute as a button, and the area was very peaceful and scenic. But the never-ending early Sunday morning calls from truck owners whose vehicles wouldn't start, etc., the relatively low revenue from the business and the financial climate in the UK at that time was making us think. Rita had been to Canada a few years earlier, and she always had a desire to return one day. I myself had often wondered about what life would be like on the other side of the Atlantic. So, immigration became a hot topic. A bonus would be that we both had relatives over there. Rita's brother Joe lived in Ottawa, and my uncle Albert lived further south in Hamilton. After serious discussions, we decided to give it a go and started to wrap up the business and selling the house. That was the easy bit. Immigration inquiries resulted in bad news. The Canadian authorities advised that Rita could not enter their country as an immigrant without her husband's permission. What a bombshell. Can you picture me asking her obviously bitter spouse for a letter permitting me to run off with his wife? But we were very determined, so Rita changed her name to mine by a legal trust deed as a good start to all the planning that would obviously be required. We sold the house at a good profit, wrapped up the business, and booked 2 tickets to Montreal, Canada. We were to sail from Liverpool on the 3rd of October 1970 on the Empress of Canada. This was the next to the last sailing before the St. Lawrence River closed for the winter. My jubilant Rita, and everybody else for that matter, was dizzy at the speed of the happenings, but doubted the wisdom of the decision in view of what the immigration officer had said. I explained that we had been told we could not immigrate. This did not preclude us from going on a holiday to Canada. We had about 2 or 3 months before the ship sailed, and as I had closed the business down, I applied for a position advertised in the local newspaper. Desmond Deacon conducted the interview at his family's 35-room mansion in Egerton. He was a member of a family that had owned and operated a local bleach works during the days when the cotton industry was flourishing in Lancashire, till the Japanese put paid to that. We hit it off right from the start, and I got the job. But before I tell you about that, I will elaborate on our relationship with this couple that became our friends for a good number of years, until they retired somewhere in Europe whilst we were overseas, and unfortunately lost contact. Desmond was a super fellow, and his wife Berta was a dream of a lady. When the business that I'm going to tell you about shortly collapsed, Desmond and I had many discussions on how he could finance his future. He was fortunate enough to have been born into a well-to-do family and had naturally become accustomed to a comfortable level of income. This had now to be replaced. It was abundantly clear that he had inherited a superb piece of real estate, and it should be put to good use. So, we zeroed in on the concept of an upmarket hotel and restaurant. The idea seemed feasible, and the planning started. The bottom line is, they converted their very suitable house into the now quite famous restaurant and hotel, Egerton House. So there, now you know the personal origin of a place that is now in tourist books and literature all over the world and is highly recommended. I am delighted to say that Rita and I dined and drank in that establishment many, many times over the following 10 or so years. But we have never paid once. On one of our visits, as usual, I made a bit of a fool of myself. After another gourmet meal, Desmond asked me what I would like to drink. I have to tell you before my reply that I had been playing all day with my baby niece Lisa, whose then current favorite phrase was, "me want." Can you imagine Desmond's look and my embarrassment when I myself replied, "Me want a brandy." Blame it on the wine. We had a laugh and consumed many more brandies, as well as the bottle of champagne our hosts brought in at 1 minute past midnight. It was now my birthday. Desmond and Berta worked so very hard. They well deserve a happy retirement. Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure. Back to the job. The company that put in the advertisement was looking for people to sell investments and life insurance. The salary predictions were enormous as usual, but you never know. An American, Bernie Kornfeld, ran the outfit. He'd created an empire, complete with European castle and dolly birds, which rocked the financial world, and his clients were making fortunes. I did okay also. That is in the history books if you wish to check it out. Being new to the sales business, I got a big kick when the Manchester manager Joel Block asked me to speak at a national sales conference about why was I so successful in selling a certain disability policy when nobody else seemed able. Being a rather shy lad, honestly, from another world, there wasn't a cat in hell's chance that I could stand up front of a hall full of professional salespeople and lecture them on how I think they should sell. I declined the speaker bit, but I would attend and answer questions. At the meeting, he asked the floor to state their client's most common objection to buying this policy. It was almost unanimous. Why should I buy a disability policy? I've never been sick. When questioned, none of the professionals could give an answer to satisfactorily overcome this, so Joel asked me what I said in these cases. "Have you any life insurance?" I asked the client. The answer is always, "yes." Then I say, "Why do you have this? You've never died before." It was the very first time I've had a standing ovation. I was so thrilled, and the salespeople made more money from then on. It was a win-win situation. Not many in this life. The next couple of months proved quite profitable. Then, the bubble burst. The company was accused of certain financial wrongdoings, and the constant media attention to this fact or fiction was devastating. Client confidence was destroyed, so necessary in the financial business, and the company was forced to cease trading. The clients ultimately received a substantial return on their investment, but the good times were ended. Incidentally, Desmond and I continued selling right to the bitter end and were the only two people left in the Manchester region when the crunch came. We met once more and decided to call it a day. He went on to his hotel project, and I relaxed for a while before Rita and I set sail for our new life. We boarded the majestic floating 5-star hotel, docked at Liverpool as planned on the 3rd of October 1970. Bubbling over with excitement, we followed the purser to our cabin. We couldn't believe we were on a ship. The size and decor were so impressive. Our berth was at the pointed end of the ship and very comfortable, or so we thought. The crossing, which took 7 instead of 6 days, was, to say the least, a nightmare. The sea was so rough, and the ship was rocking and rolling like you'd never believe. Just about everybody on board was being affected in some way. Most were sick, including many of the crew, and some could simply not walk about and enjoy the benefits of the cruise. The healthy crew members did their best to make the ailing passengers comfortable, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. If you'll pardon the pun, Rita was very seasick and had to have injections every day. I remember thinking that we had been out the country for less than a week and already had a medical bill as long as my arm. I guess the ship's doctor recognized the look on my face and charged us for only 1 shot, to my surprise and relief. In an attempt to escape from the constant all-directional motion of our allotted quarters, we spent the first couple of days sleeping on wooden reclining chairs outside on the deck. After 2 nights of no sleep, a sore ass and coping with Rita's moaning and groaning, I approached the purser and gave him 3 options. Find us another cabin, turn the ship around, and go back to Liverpool, or prepare for a burial at sea. He laughed at my unusual but understandable request and found us a cabin towards the middle of the ship. This was a marginal improvement, and Rita slept better, but it didn't benefit me. We had met a lady with acute seasickness, and I gallantly let her sleep in our new berth and returned to my cedar mattress on the deck. Apart from the rough sea problem, we had a good week. Rita was like a zombie, but she really tried to participate in all the activities, etc. One of these was a fancy dress ball. 2 friends and us illustrated a topical theme, seasickness. We applied green make up to the 3 patients and dressed up one as a nurse, armed with a hypodermic made from a wire coat hanger and Coca-Cola cans. We got second prize. Whilst Rita was combating her debilitating illness, I passed the time by playing the one-armed bandits. These were located in nooks and crannies all around the ship. I couldn't help noticing an affluent-looking lady who seemed to have no luck at all. I never saw her win. As discreetly as possible, I followed her around and put money in her machine when it became available. More often than not, I dropped the jackpot. Uncanny, but very welcome. I had to go to the little kiosk each morning to change my pocket full of tanners for notes. At the end of the voyage, I had actually won enough to cover the cost of one fare, 108 pounds. The lady's name, by the way, was Molson, and I later drank many a can of Molson beer in Canada in her honor. The ship itself was a luxury liner and provided all the conveniences of its landed-locked equivalent. Prior to us going for our first meal, Rita asked the purser if we had to dress formally. His sad reply was, "Unfortunately not anymore, madam." The dining room didn't disappoint us. It was huge, and I'm sure comparable to any first-class restaurant. We were seated with 2 other couples and a single Canadian chap. We couldn't believe the choices on the menu. Dishes we could only normally afford on special occasions. You get the picture. Every meal was a delight and served by an efficient and courteous waiter. It was very noticeable that many passengers, including Rita, could not take advantage of the excellent meals. They were too busy commiserating with each other about the rough voyage and how it was affecting them. At the end of the voyage, our waiter dropped a hint that it was customary to reward his hard work with a tip. Being unfamiliar with this pagan ritual, English people get a wage for their efforts. We agreed on an appropriate amount and slipped it to the hovering waiter. The last meal saw a noticeable change in his attention. When we commented, he replied, "What do you expect for about a penny a day per person?" He'd done his calculations, and our donation obviously fell a little short of his expectations. We were a little surprised and somewhat embarrassed by his candid comment. It was unanimous that we show additional appreciation, so we thanked him profusely for all his kind attention during the past week and called it a day. Taking everything into consideration, it was an exciting voyage. But we were glad to see the estuary of the St. Lawrence River and the gradual appearance of the Montreal skyline. Life in Canada, 1970 to 1979. We arrived at the port of Montreal at 7 p.m. on the 10th of October, and without delay started to scan the awaiting crowd on the docks searching for Rita's brother. Joe had traveled from his home in Ottawa, about 120 miles, to pick us up. Rita and Joe finally spotted each other. Watching the pair of them waving frantically and blowing kisses gave me goosebumps. Rita couldn't contain her emotion and wept with joy. It had been so long since she had seen her elder brother. Unfortunately, we were not permitted to disembark and had to spend the night on board. Joe understood the delay, drove home, and returned the following day.